Hello everyone and welcome to the Not Just New Movies podcast, the show where we review a seemingly random film currently not in theaters. My name is Ben Pearson and today we're going to be talking about Chuck Russell's 1987 film, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. Joining me is my regular co-host, Tyler. How are you, man?
Ben, are you ready for prime time?
I am, and we'll get into that very shortly. If you guys are first-time listeners, welcome to the show. You can find all of our previous episodes at njnmpodcast.blogspot.com, or you could subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts, Google, all the usual suspects there. If you'd like to contact us in any way, you can do that by, well, I say in any way. There's really only one good way to contact us, which would be by email at notjustnewmovies@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter as well, but it's just easier if you'd like us to read your comment on the air or something like that.
Yeah,
you have a better chance of getting through to us by email. So
we are not accepting faxes at this time.
Correct. This is the third episode. This is a special episode, Tyler, because it's the third episode in our newest mini-series, which is NJNM to the third power, which covers movies that have the number 3 in the title or that are a third entry in a given franchise.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that. It's like the focal point.
Yeah. And we used to have all sorts of recurring segments and things like that on the show in our earlier days. And there was once a segment called the T-Spot where we would just sort of throw it to you and you would talk about whatever you wanted. But you were telling me right before we started recording that you have an idea for a new brief segment of the show. Is that right?
You can hear the whistle. The stove is hot. I'm going to serve up some hot tea.
Hot tea.
Don't burn your tongue, Ben.
Okay. All right. So what's
this is the short form hot takes.
Okay.
And today's hot tea is Thunderstruck is AC/DC's only good song.
Only good song. Wow.
Ooh, boy.
Man,
that's hot going down, my friend.
You are blindsiding me here.
Steamy.
I kind of feel like let me pull up my music and
wait. I don't think you're allowed to challenge the hot tea.
Oh, I can't. Okay,
no, you can't. No, I'm joking.
I kind of like the hot tea as an unassailable fact that just usually everyone, listeners, myself, we just all have to accept it as truth, and there's nothing we can do about it.
No, I was hoping you would come back on it. So
I would just say that maybe Hell's Bells might be a contender.
Sounds a lot like Thunderstruck, though.
Okay, well, if the underlying thesis of your argument is that all AC/DC songs sound alike, then you will hear no argument from me.
No, I think the underlying foundation of this is I heard Thunderstruck on the radio yesterday, and I go, "Wow, this is a great song," and then I said, "That's the hot tea for tomorrow." It's the only good song.
Little peek behind the curtain, folks, and how the hot tea segment got.
That was the forming of the tea bag, and then I steeped it this morning for just this episode.
Okay, great. And I think
it starts with a T, Ben.
Oh, go ahead.
A trailer for this movie.
Trailer. I love it.
It's 1987. Do you know where Freddy is? There's no waking up from this nightmare. No! A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 3, Dream Warriors.
All right, Tyler, so let's get into this. This is unusual for me watching this movie because I've never seen any of the other movies in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So
that is weird.
This is not something I would normally do, just watch a movie completely out of context like this, but these are the sacrifices I make for this show.
This was the original thought behind when we were curating this limited series, that we were going to try to pick movies that you had not seen the other entries for.
Right.
So I'm interested to see how this experience went for you.
Well,
did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Did you have a ride?
I think I had absorbed enough of the basic storylines of or the basic foundational elements of this franchise to feel like I didn't really miss much going into it. So I feel like this kind of was a good entry point for me. And I know that you've seen way more of these movies than I have, and know a lot more about like the arc of Freddy Krueger as an evolving horror icon over the years. And from what little research I was able to do about this movie, it sort of seems like this film is like something of a turning point where, we were talking on last week's episode about how Friday the 13th Part 3 is the movie that introduced the hockey mask iconography to the Jason Voorhees character. And this movie seems to be, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is a turning point for the Freddy Krueger character where he sort of begins to be a little bit more jokey, and the franchise sort of took a turn a little bit here. Am I right about that?
Well, no, he's always kind of been a little bit of a little scamp. In the first one, Nancy's on the phone and he goes, "I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy," and then his tongue comes out of the phone.
Oh, and God.
Tries to lick her face. So he's always kind of a Loki-esque character, Loki, that is.
Right.
And but he's also a horrible child murderer / probably molester. So I don't know why people are like, "Oh yeah, Freddy's my favorite." It's like, okay, interesting archetype there. Yeah. But and this is part of the fun of this show, is I thought about like rewatching the first two just to get an idea of where this one went, but I was too lazy to do that. And then I was like, well, I'll just read the Wikipedia plots for the first two movies so that I could explain to you what has been happening, and I didn't do that. So this is we're almost in the same boat here, because in the first one he's attacking these kids because the kids are the parent, or the kids are the children of the people who burned him and killed him the first time. And then at the end of the first one, it's a very Friday the 13th ending where he's not really gone. They think he's gone, but he's not really gone. And then the second one, it's a whole new cast of characters, and I think there's this one's cited as kind of the director's way of having the character struggle with his homosexuality, and AKA Freddy. So that's an interesting take. And then the third one has Nancy coming back, and Nancy's dad is involved. And so that mythology is built upon now, as we'll get to, his bones and and kind of what happened to him.
Okay.
So you're kind of caught up now.
Okay.
As best as you can by someone who didn't do any research beforehand.
Well, I mean, at least you've seen the previous two.
I have, and I've seen 4, 5, and 6. I'm struggling. 6 is probably one of my favorites, but man, if you quizzed me on 4 and 5 right now, I don't think I would get any of them right. And I've seen them probably 3 or 4 times.
Oh wow! Okay.
And that's really sad. I don't know why my brain is like that now. Well, I can pick up on essences, but as far as plot points, oh boy, I got to watch the movie like a day beforehand.
Well, things should be pretty fresh for me because I just watched this film for the very first time, in the minutes leading up to this recording. So, yes. So let's get into. Well, actually, before we get into some of the details, what did you think about this movie? Just as a standalone horror film, and then within the larger arc of this franchise. I
like it because it's horror, but it's also almost like a comic book movie, except rated R. And the kids are the Justice League or whatever, the Avengers, and they're Dream Warriors. Although I don't think they've ever I don't think they ever at any point said the phrase Dream Warriors. Maybe they did.
I don't think so. The theme song to the movie is called Dream Warriors.
By Dokken.
Written and performed by Dokken, which is a hair metal band that was popular in the 80s that was, I would say, a mid to lower tier hair metal, which is putting it in a very, very specific niche of American pop culture history there.
I think Dokken fans would take offense to the hair metal.
I apologize to all two of you.
I don't know if they're hair metal. I think they're metal. And maybe they had big hair. I was just thinking about that. More probably along the lines of a Sabbath.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Maybe a Megadeth.
Oh, wow. All right.
But the music, we were talking about this before, because I think you said, isn't the music really good in this one? And I can confirm it is pretty good in this one.
Yeah, I noticed
Did you enjoy it?
the score was by Angelo Badalamenti, who did the score for Twin Peaks, and I love the Twin Peaks theme song and all the music in that series. I don't know if you're familiar with Twin Peaks at all, Tyler, but
just the guy from Dune.
David Lynch, yes.
No, the actor.
Kyle MacLachlan. I guess both of them were. That's right. It was a reunion for them. I enjoyed the music for this. I wish that there was a little bit more. I don't know. Like I wish I kind of like took a little bit more center stage at certain points. Like really go all out, because it felt relatively restrained for a lot of it. And I just in movies like this that go so far over the top and like introduce you to these crazy wild concepts about getting sucked into dream worlds and stuff. I kind of wish that the music for films like that would really like sort of match the insanity of the of what we're seeing on screen. But I think that they were trying to strike a balance, and I don't blame them for their decision. But just thinking about the music as an isolated thing, I kind of wish that it would have been cranked up another notch.
Have you ever listened to those John Carpenter's Lost Themes albums?
No, I haven't. Did he do one for this movie?
No, but I feel like some of those would have fit in pretty well with this movie.
Yeah, they're very a lot of synth and all that.
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
Like music that your ears aren't ready for, man.
Yes. I see.
But I love these movies for the dream sequences. I don't think the deaths so much, because people, I think, cite these movies as like, oh, that was a cool death. It's like, well, I was
going to say they're all kind of the same. It's like most of them are just like Freddy slashing people, and it kind of gets a little repetitious after a while. But there was that really great one. We can like jump all around the plot, but there's that great one in this one where he like puppeteers that character by his own tendon, which is like really gruesome,
disgusting,
like, this horrible image. And then like you see like Space Freddy from who's like hovering in the sky somehow.
That was
cool. Slices the tendons that he is using to puppeteer, and then the guy plummets to his death, and it looks like a suicide. But
that's a lot of these movies have that cool those cool effects, the special effects that I really dig. And then the only thing that really kind of takes you out of it was the little balls floating around. They kind of tried to do like a CG thing.
Oh yeah.
And but a lot of these like actual effects, or whatever you want to practical effects, or the way that they kind of will meld frames together. So like the Freddy in the sky picture looks really cool. It looks very 80s, but it also looks really cool. So that's a lot of times why I enjoy these movies so much, is the abstract thought that went into designing it.
Yeah, and in terms of the practical effects, I think like right from the very beginning, that first dream sequence, that Patricia Arquette, I was not aware that she was in this movie, but she's like one of the lead characters that she experiences is where she's like running through this like paper mache house and trying to save this little girl, and then you think that she wakes up, but it turns out she goes into the bathroom and tries to turn the water on in the sink, and then the handles to the sink grow Freddy knives out of them and like grab her. And I thought that was a really cool, and it's like all practically done. And I thought that was a really cool way to sort of like pull you in immediately, or pull me in anyway, as somebody who is, like completely unfamiliar with this franchise from a viewing perspective. But
yeah, that's what's unique about this series, is because Friday the 13th, it's all like woods, and Halloween, it's suburbia. And in this one, it's real fantastical horror. But still, the work that goes into designing all that stuff is probably worth the applause more often than, I mean, Halloween has its storytelling, I suppose, but the just the artistic side of these movies is pretty cool.
Yeah, they definitely, I think this is like arguably one of the most creative horror movie franchises that I've seen anyway. That I know of, just because of, like you're talking about, the scope of this thing. Like you're literally able to do pretty much anything you can think of, instead of being, sort of hemmed in by these specific tropes of location and stuff like that.
And there are 7 movies worth, as opposed to like, to bring back Dune, like artistic, really cool to look at. It's only one movie. Nightmare on Elm Street, you can see, as abstract and artistic a look, but there's also like 14 hours worth of that.
Yeah. So talking about the cast, I mentioned Patricia Arquette. I was really also very surprised to see Lawrence Fishburne's name, or Larry Fishburne.
Larry Fishburne, the king of cartoons.
I had no idea that he was a part of this, and it sort of reminded me of like the old days when we used to watch like crazy horror movies and then some more mainstream stuff. We watched like Leprechaun, for example, and like very young Jennifer Aniston was in that. Just thinking about like how many major Hollywood movie stars, like Patricia Arquette won an Oscar a few years ago for Boyhood, and like I don't know if this was one of her first roles or not. I didn't go back through her filmography, but just like it's wild to me to think about how popular this genre has been, and like how many people, even actors and performers that you would normally associate with, sort of more artistic endeavors, I guess, have crisscrossed through the horror genre in some capacity or another. So
now, did she thank Robert Englund in her acceptance speech?
For Boyhood, no. I think he was left out, maybe left on the cutting room floor for that one. But
do you think people call him Bobby on set like Robert De Niro?
Oh man, that would
well,
be,
the thing working with Bobby Englund. He's always got those knives.
The question is, has Robert De Niro and Robert Englund ever worked together on anything? Because then, which Bobby are you referring to?
Oh, yeah. Oh, man, that's got to be a sight. Those two guys walk into the same room. Bobby.
So one of the things, Tyler, that I just want to mention right off the bat was, in our discussion about Halloween 3 recently, we spent a lot of time talking about God, I can't remember.
Also artistic in a sense.
Yeah, sure. The actor who played the doctor in that movie, what is his name? With the mustache.
Todd Astin? John Astin? No.
Sean Astin? I don't recall his name, but in any
Hold
case,
on, I have it in my email because I sent you something recently.
Oh yeah. Or a tweet maybe that you sent it to me. It's a picture
to
of
my
that
biggest
guy.
fan with love. Oh boy, can't read that.
Man, we're on it right now.
I got his picture though. Looks good. Got that scarf.
I'm gonna pull it up right now. The actor's
I want to say it's
is
like Ted Astin.
Tom Atkins.
Tom Atkins.
There we go. That
so
is
close.
Riveting radio, I'm sure, for people. Yeah,
the stash.
We were talking a lot about him and how sort of uneasy the love story was between him and the much younger female lead.
Yeah.
And I got similar vibes here with this guy in this movie who I sort of viewed as like a Judge Reinhold reject. Like
that's a good one.
Like a poor man's Judge Reinhold. He's like a psychiatrist that works at this psychiatric hospital where Patricia Arquette's character is interred.
Which is funny because Judge Reinhold's like a poor man's Charles Grodin, wouldn't you say?
Oh, I've never thought about that.
The dad from Beethoven.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, man, you're dropping all sorts of things on me in this episode. Man, I need to go back and watch a lot of Charles Grodin stuff. He was like a really big deal for a very short period of time.
A huge star. Had his own talk show, I think, for a while.
Oh. Okay, enough with that train of thought.
But back to your point, yes, I agree with you on the relationship status of the grad student and the doctor.
Yeah, Nancy, who is like you're talking about this main character from the previous movies, or at least the first film, is brought in as like this super, grad school superstar character, and then almost immediately forms this sort of relationship that I was really hoping wouldn't go further than it did, and thankfully they didn't really lean too heavily on that, because there's more going on in this movie that they didn't really have enough time to get into a whole love thing between this intern and her boss at this place.
Yeah.
So thankfully we were spared that subplot. But how do you want to approach this, Tyler? Were there things that you had written down that you wanted to discuss?
No, I didn't write anything down, but I think I was hoping this episode would be more dedicated to your first time viewing of a Freddy movie. as far as the character, how do you feel about Freddy Krueger? Are you scared of him? Would you be scared of him? Is he someone that we should feel bad for because he's the son of 10,000 maniacs or whatever they say in the movie?
Yeah, I thought that was kind of he's the bastard son of 100 maniacs is this description that this ghost nun gives, and there's this really disturbing accounting of what happened to Freddy's mother, and then of course you realize like by the end that this ghost nun actually was Freddy's mother. I was not thrilled with that. Like the idea, I mean, it's a disturbing idea on its face, and I mean clearly that's what they're going for, is that like Freddy is this like demon child born of sexual assault, basically. Like it's not a great thing to think about. And I wonder, I never, even with those horrible origins, I never really viewed Freddy as like a sympathetic character in any way in this movie. Is this the first time that we discover what his origins are? Do you know that?
I believe so, yeah, as far as like where he comes from. I think in the initial films he's like the disgraced janitor of the school. But it did bring up the issue of the nature v nurture discussion of how, even under those conditions, baby Freddy, what did he go through in his life that made him not only a child molester / murderer, but to also what secret talisman did he have that allowed him to be reincarnated as a dream demon?
Yeah.
And I think they talk a little bit about that in the first one, where he's essentially like a haunted spirit that just can haunt dreams because he had been killed or burned so poorly and then killed by the parents. So were the parents in the right? It's due process, Freddy?
I think these are questions that I would probably have grappled with if I had seen more of the movies, but because this was my first time, I was just sort of not overwhelmed, but just sort of like overtaken with the imagery of Freddy as like this clear villain. I think if I had watched the first two movies and then seen this one, I maybe would have been familiar enough with the character where some like a window would have cracked open where I could have been like, oh, okay, maybe I can consider the idea that Freddy is not like as pure evil, maybe, or at least that it's not fully his fault or something. I'm not sure. I think that's a complicated idea, and something that this movie seems to want people to grapple with, but I just was not capable of doing so after, without the rest of the context there. But
could you say your adventure will continue with the Freddy franchise?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, maybe eventually. Okay, I'm what, 35 years old, and it's the first time I'm seeing a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, so maybe I'll go another 35 years and then check out another one. But,
okay, yeah, I'd like 5.
yeah, exactly.
Wondering what happened between the two.
Yeah, so we'll see about that. But yeah, I think the idea, of course, is terrifying, and like one of the scariest things in this movie to me is something that was just mentioned offhandedly by one of the characters, where he talks about another person a character that we never see, who was in the psychiatric institution, who, God, like even just thinking about it makes me like nauseated. Like cut off his own eyelids so he couldn't go to sleep. Man, that is just a very haunting concept, and thinking about how most of us use sleep as like a respite from the day and the problems that we have and whatever. Like the idea of that sort of sacred space being invaded and taken away, and you constantly being on edge because you could be murdered. Like, yeah, it's a man, like what a hell of a concept for a horror franchise. I love that idea and how like just twisted it is. So yeah, in terms of like the execution of how Freddy appears in this movie and like the stuff that he does, like, I mean, I think I'm more frightened of it on a conceptual level than I was with anything specific that actually like was depicted in this movie, if that makes any sense. Like I am more disturbed by the concept behind it than the guy. Like, although I guess there was a moment early on where Patricia Arquette is running. She's got that little girl on the tricycle in her arms in that first dream sequence, and she's running through a hallway. and you see Freddy's shadow on a wall briefly, and like that, I think was something that I found genuinely scary. Like putting myself in her position, just being like, you're running through this totally unfamiliar environment, and there's this freaking maniac who is right behind you. Like that I think is a genuinely scary thing. But then like actually seeing Freddy up close, he doesn't strike me as
he's not
as super scary. So
that was one of the things I kind of chuckled at, like at the very beginning. He just kind of, his first appearance in the dream sequence was he just kind of pops around a corner and stands there for a second. He's just like one of the Three Stooges or so. Hello. Yeah. Okay. Usually he's like taken some form, like you'll pull up your shirt and he'll be like embedded in your stomach or something like that, something like really nauseating. But him just popping around the corner and kind of waving at you with his knife glove is like, okay, that's good.
Yeah, like that snake form that he takes where he's like slowly consuming Patricia Arquette's character. That I found very disturbing on like a gut, visceral level. Like, oh geez, like how terrible would that be to be like aware and eaten, like as it's happening by this like horrific, it would be bad enough imagining it, as like an alligator or some sort of like creature that exists in the real world, but like this disgusting looking, like dripping giant face on the end of a snake. Like, that's a really disturbing image too. So
now, another theme I noticed with the Dr. Sims, the kind of, I don't want to say complacent, but the kind of the...
Yeah, like the status quo kind of.
Yeah, status quo, and kind of the, I guess it would be more appropriate nowadays, kind of the victim blaming methods that she would use and not believing these kids that she's supposed to be taking care of. And just kind of sedating them and strapping them to a bed whenever she feels like it. I think it speaks to, I don't know, the prison system. It speaks to mental health in general, how we treat it. And, for a movie that's supposed to be like a slasher fun summer blockbuster or whatever, it's just not, it's not something you see with the Friday the 13th series or Halloween, I guess, is more of a storytelling franchise, but I don't feel like it addresses the same kind of issues that these movies do.
Yeah, that was the biggest surprise. I had that written down as well. It really has the feeling of like the elder generation blaming the younger generation for the problems that these kids are going through. But in fact, these kids are like paying for the sins of their parents. And I wonder how much that idea resonated in 1987 when this came out, because, and I'm sure it did to some degree, but now in society, that divide between generations and sort of, like the societal and cultural line between, I guess, our generation and, the boomers or whatever, like the millennials and the boomers, that line has been, so clearly delineated, and that gap I feel like has grown even further. So maybe that message is more relevant now than it was at the time. What do you think about that?
I think I watched it yesterday and it felt, I think I thought of it more of a kind of the victims coming forward, whether it's sexual assault or child molestation, and us kind of, not us specifically, but maybe societally going, oh, well, you must have imagined that, or that can't be right. You don't remember, you were too young. Or, if it was an adult being attacked, it's like, oh, you must have, done something to make Freddy attack you. And it's like, that's kind of what's going on here, is these kids are like, this is real, like this is happening to us and all these adults, even Larry Fishburne's character is kind of like on the fence about what he's supposed to do there. And the doctor boyfriend or whatever, forgot, he eventually is like won over, but that's only, it's really only because Nancy is like, listen, I'm going to tell you this like fantastical story. And he's like, okay, I guess. But, who's to say that anybody else who isn't talk to about this and like convince that this is what's going on, like we'll just like sweep it under the rug or just, you know, sedate the patient or whatever.
Yeah,
I think it's a look at what could be a widespread problem.
Yeah.
The other thing,
and you know, and even, sorry, just to
no, go ahead.
Put a period at the end of that sentence. It also like sort of reminded me, you know, even taking out like the societal implications and potential allegories and commentaries, it just gets really to the heart of like that feeling that you have when you're a young person sometimes, and like you are trying to explain what is happening and adults just don't believe you, and like you know, even like I said, just sort of like removing the critical and removing the I'm trying to figure out the right way to say this. I guess just boiling it down to its essence, it feels like it gets at that feeling of being of not being listened to, which is something that I feel like everybody can relate to. I feel like it captures that really well, and then, you know, builds all these other commentaries and ideas sort of on top of that sort of basic foundation. But go ahead, I interrupted you.
No, I think that's a good way to kind of segue into more about the film, because that's one of the big themes, I think. The other one I thought of was like the Stephen King child trauma themes. He always has kind of and I guess there are these theories that all the King's works exist in some form of a Marvel super universe. And that when kids are traumatized at a young age, they get The Shining, and that The Shining takes its form in different ways. So like the kids in it have a shining of a sense because they were traumatized. And there's like this underlying theme that a lot of the King novels with kids have been, or adults who have grown up have had some kind of child trauma. And so that's obviously in this film, but this is after The Shining. This is after, I don't know when it was released as a book. Probably 1988, maybe late 80s. I'm not sure. But Stephen King obviously had probably had some influence over that. Just horror in general.
I'm looking this up right now, and the book was published in 1986. So close. A year before this, but.
You know what they did with the movie, Ben? They made the first part in the 80s instead of the 50s.
Yes. I actually like the first It Chapter 1. I enjoyed that.
I liked it better when it was called Stranger Things.
Jesus.
No, I'm just kidding. Speaking of, have you ever watched the Pop Culture Detective on YouTube by chance?
No, I don't think so.
It's a good little, he does like video essays, and one of them was about the dangers of nostalgia in Stranger Things. That's a good one.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe we'll put
you can still like Stranger Things, but it's a way to, or he tries to get us, the viewers, to look at media in under new lenses, which I always find fascinating.
You were talking about the thematics, the thematic elements of this movie earlier, and one of the things that I seemed to that I don't think the movie did a really great job of was like this battle between science versus faith. It tries to raise that, and you know, it's got this like mysterious nun character who is like roaming around, and you know, she's like, if you believe in science, you could be the one who died, you know, like that kind of thing. But like.
What if God gave us science, sister? Huh? You ever think about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure that distinction needed to be drawn in this movie, because like the way that the whole thing is brought together is like, it felt like they were trying to pay lip service to that and like flesh that theme out a little bit more, where like Freddy is ultimately dispatched by, you know, holy water and the crucifix and stuff like that. But it really didn't feel of a piece with the rest of the movie. It sort of felt like, oh, this is just this is just a way to get rid of him. It didn't really like resonate with me as like, oh, these are larger points that these filmmakers are trying to get at. Whereas like, you know, in something like I don't know, the Exorcist or The Conjuring or something like religion, the idea between religion and horror is like the central point in those movies, or at least you know, a very, very prominent point, and this it just sort of felt like more of an afterthought to me.
Yeah.
But I think that the things that we were talking about earlier were like really what the movie's more concerned with, and it just tried to sort of add one more thing, maybe bite off a little bit more than they could chew. But
now, did you think of these kids as superheroes, individual? Because what's his name, the big strong guy, he essentially turned into a superhero of sorts in the dream world, and I that was one of my favorite aspects of this particular installment. And I feel like they kind of do that in the remaining installments, where there's, I think it's part 6, maybe I don't know, and he's like a comic book guy, and so his dream sequence is like comic book themed. So did you enjoy that it was kind of on the nose, that there's this one defining feature of each kid, and they just happen to also die in their dream with a theme to why, like it was almost like Willy Wonka.
Right, yeah, and like that back half of the
except everyone dies. Oh wait, they all die in Willy Wonka too. So it is almost exactly like Willy Wonka.
Once they go into that dream world at the end, and like it's really like cordoned off. Like each character gets their own segment for a few minutes. But yeah, I enjoyed that. I think I was more intellectually curious or interested in the idea of Patricia Arquette's character being the one who has supernatural abilities in the real world, because the dream world is like, of course, everybody would be able to do whatever they want. Right. And real quick, since I don't think we'll probably talk about this more, I did like how that moment where Will, the guy who I guess jumped out of, who tried to kill himself by jumping from a high location and ended up in a wheelchair. He when he is like sucked into the battle with Freddy at the very end, you sort of think that his wizard plan is going to work. Like he realizes like, oh, I can alter the reality of the dream space and like become this dungeon master wizard that I envision myself as, this sort of idealized version of myself. And he like destroys this horrific, spiked wheelchair and seems to be attacking Freddy. And you sort of think like, oh wow, he's like cracked the code of like how to win in this dream world. And then he's just immediately killed. And I was like, oh, I really enjoyed that, because the movie sort of gives you this head fake of like, oh, you think you know what's going on, but
you think he would like escape and tell the others, hey, you just have to believe in your magic powers or whatever. Instead he's just slaughtered.
But the idea of Patricia Arquette's character in the real world having this supernatural ability to like pull people into her dreams and like having it have nothing to do with Freddy. She's had this gift since she was a kid. I thought was an interesting thing, and I was like, I wonder if, because it's the only Nightmare on Elm Street movie I've ever seen, I was like, I wonder if every movie in this franchise has this, where like there's a little bit of magic in the quote unquote real world, and maybe that sort of like goes to explain a little bit of how Freddy is able to do this. It's just, like they're all operating in an Earth that has a little bit more magic in it than our real Earth does, or something. I don't know. That's sort of where my head was going.
Well, in the second one, he does try to come into the real world, and I think he does succeed at the end. But then you also have the skeleton, the Harryhausen sequence, where he battles the two dads the future son-in-law battle the skeleton of Freddy, and then I laughed at this one too, where he just kind of like gets tired he just tosses him into the grave, kind of gets tired, gives his like skeleton celebration, then just collapses back into a pile of bones. That was silly. The other thing I didn't like, and to go back to like each one having their individual like moment, I feel like that is maybe the laziest part of these movies, is like setting up the thing that each kid has. So like the only reason we know he's into wizards is because that one sequence where they're like playing Dungeons and Dragons or whatever movie for that's a really cool scene, because I feel like there's a bunch of made for that movie things. Like I think the game might be a Nightmare on Elm Street original, and then I was trying to look at the bulletin board behind them, and I wanted to say there was a Gremlin poster or something back there. So I was trying to see if I could get all the little Easter eggs, but I couldn't.
Yeah, I
And
noticed that it said Wizard Master instead of like Dungeon Master or Dungeons and Dragons, and I was like, I guess they just couldn't get the rights, so they're just like trying to put us in that headspace without infringing on any copyright or whatever.
And this is a good time to announce my Kickstarter for that game, just that fantasy game from Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. I'm asking for $100,000.
That sounds fair.
And, I will definitely not run away with that money. Definitely will not run away with that money. So yeah, that's the kind of the part that you're like, that's kind of stupid. But it's the thread of Freddy that kind of goes through the movie that you're like, okay, this mythology is enough to outweigh the kind of the silly part of it.
Yeah.
Because Nancy is, an interesting character, and spoiler alert, she doesn't make it. Yeah. And I felt like that was such a silly thing to do. Like, I know they were trying to probably shock everybody, but towards the end, like, these kids that we were supposed to like be rooting for were just dying so quickly and needlessly. And, there was no time to mourn. And then even the funeral was only Nancy's funeral. I was like, what about those other kids? Do they not get buried together?
Yeah. The movie, it sort of had a sense of like trying to, I don't know, it rubbed me the wrong way a little bit because it almost painted those characters as weaker somehow. Like they were not able to be quote unquote strong enough to take on Freddy. And like, it sort of, to me, it sort of blamed their, you're talking about victim blaming with Dr. Sims character earlier. It sort of felt like the movie did that a little bit in that section where, especially the character who, has the big mohawk and the knives and everything.
Yeah,
and
she's bad.
Previously had this drug problem, and then Freddy just like injects her with, knife drugs or whatever. And like, she is not strong enough to fight back, but that's just it. Like, that's the last we ever see of her, and nobody ever, seemingly cares about her again. Like you're saying, there's no funeral for that character. And like, same thing with Will. Like you think he's going to do his wizard thing, and then he's just killed. And it's like, I don't think we had enough time with those characters to, to know if there was. I guess just the way that it played out, it struck me as like, oh wow, that's really unfortunate the way that they decided to handle this, because it reads to me, at least through a 2020 lens, that like, this is their fault in some way, and I don't know if that's fair to those characters.
Well, it's also because if we keep comparing it to the other famous franchises, there's usually a group of kids, and most of them are unlikable, right? So they have some thing that they need to be, not that I'm saying they need to be killed for, but there's usually like a character flaw of sorts,
right?
That is viewed like negatively.
In Friday the 13th Part 3, he's just like a total dick, and you can't wait for him to die. Right. But these characters, I think this is probably what you're going to say. These characters don't feel that way. Is that what you're going to say?
Yeah, they're not bad people, and we eventually start to like them. To kind of kill them off as expendable is, if anything, why didn't Freddy visit Dr. Sims in her dream? Probably because she never lived on Elm Street, because that's kind of his jurisdiction. But, I'm sure Freddy can figure out a way to enter someone who didn't live on Elm Street's dreams.
Yeah, I wonder if that happens later in the franchise.
Maybe a scene where Dr. Sims like visits Elm Street.
Yeah,
and he's like, "Gotcha." Yeah, there is a history with the street. So the house is kind of his like place. That's like his little a la Hellraiser, his little space box or whatever Pinhead comes out of.
I see.
So he kind of hangs out there in the netherworld and the sleep world or whatever. So they try to, in later films, try to relate it back to Elm Street. But I think by number 6, you might like 6, Ben, it's almost like a post-apocalyptic world.
Wow.
And you can't even like fly over Elm Street. Like that whole city is like a no-fly zone because Freddy is so dangerous.
Wow. Okay. And, all right. Man, they really expanded the scope of that.
It might be where. Oh, it also features the Nintendo Power Glove as one of the killing moments. So there's plenty of product placement too. Okay. I think it came out the same year as The Wizard, so everything's coming together very nicely.
I had two stray thoughts written down that don't really go anywhere else in this conversation, so I'll just bring them up now.
Okay.
I thought that Will, the character who's in the wheelchair, reminded me a lot of, he physically resembled a young Bob Gale, the co-writer of Back to the Future. So I just thought, if you want to do a little Google image search of those two people, maybe side by side, I feel like you'll find what I'm talking about there. Yeah. And then the bar that Nancy's father is having to break in. Did you notice the name of the bar?
I did, and I thought about it. I was like, I hope we mentioned this, and I'm glad you reminded me. Go ahead.
It's called Little Nemo's, which I think is probably a reference to Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland,
which is
by Winsor McKay, which is about this little boy and I think a flying squirrel that is a pet of his who, is like whisked through dreamlands basically in his flying bed. So that struck me as like a relatively highbrow reference for a movie like this. And I was like, that's a cool little moment. And then
you're a real nerd if you pick up on that. I think is whoever designed that neon sign. They're like, only a freaking nerd's gonna get this.
Yes.
Bingo. There's two of them.
And then I was disappointed because in that alleyway, that dark alleyway scene with the neon light, that one character gets killed by Freddy's injections, and there's a neon sign in the background that just says Jake's Bar, and I was like, is that a reference to something? It's too vague for me to be able to really pick up on, but Little Nemo was pretty clear, I thought. So Tyler, I think we've gotten to the point now where we have to address the line, which you alluded to earlier, which is welcome to time, bitch. What do you think about this line?
Let's see. I quote it almost every day of my life. No, it is a often quoted line in my household. Not directed at anyone in particular, just kind of walking by, doing chores, just kind of talking to myself. And I'm like, welcome to prime time, bitch. But it is so on the nose, like lame dad joke that and then he just throws in a bitch at the end of like his killer one-liners, and it makes me laugh. So she's obsessed with television. She gets a television smashed in, her head gets smashed into a television. And it's another moment where like Freddy's embedded into the thing. So that's kind of creepy looking. Like he comes out of the top of and there's like this shrink wrap around his head.
Rabbit ears on his head.
So you're kind of scared, but not really because it's so silly. But anytime he can, that's like my favorite of the puns, and it just it really made me a fan of the. What didn't I joke about saying stupid shit like that?
It
really brought me in as a fan of the franchise.
Beforehand, you were talking about how that sounds like something that somebody would say
on a podcast would say, and here I am. But I think I wonder. I bet there's a list or an Excel spreadsheet or something with all his one-liners and their relation to the death itself. So it's usually like someone's thrown into a boiling pot like a lobster, and he's like stay out of the kitchen if it's hot. Can't stand the heat. Stay out of the kitchen, bitch.
Sure.
And
that's what I was going to ask you about. Is bitch like a thing for Freddy? Like he does it twice in this movie. Like there's that moment where he carves the word to the guy's chest, like come and get him or whatever. But he adds bitch to the end of that too, and it's like I guess it's 1987, and like people are just like throwing that term around a little bit more frequently than they would today, probably. But like, is that intrinsic to the Freddy character? Does he do that a lot?
It's one of his things. Yeah.
Okay.
It's burnt face, fedora, knife glove, bitch.
The word bitch. Okay, good. Yeah.
Oh, and stripy sweater. He's got a lot of things. We also can't talk about Friday. Which one's this? Nightmare on Elm Street.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Dream Warriors, without mentioning the Nightmare on Elm Street NES video game, which some Nintendo executive in the 80s is like, what's great for kids? R-rated horrors turned into video games. And there's a Friday the 13th one, and there's a Nightmare on Elm Street one, and in that you have to go and collect his bones. So I think they used the plot line of Dream Warriors for the video game because. What did you think of them, like the county-wide junkyard. It almost felt like a Amazon jungle-esque junkyard, and them having to find. Would you remember where you put someone's bones in a junkyard after 30 years, maybe?
Man, yeah, I don't know.
Is that something I would have probably never found those ever again? And also the question is, do they never move the inventory? Is it just sit there for 100 years? How long is this stuff supposed to sit here?
That's the big question I had, was like, even if you could remember that it was a red Cadillac or whatever, and like you could remember like the miraculously remember the general area of the junkyard where it was, like who's to say that other cars haven't like fallen into position above it or below it where it's like inaccessible? I found that to be like one of the most unbelievable aspects of this movie, just from like a pure, realism perspective. But
I know they needed that scene to like parallel the dream world ending, so I understand they needed to spread it out somehow. But that could have also been like an entire movie's worth of content, like the adventures in the junkyard. Almost like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but in a junkyard.
And I was wondering, like, having not seen the first and second movie, if like that red Cadillac and like that exact spot in the junkyard is like an iconic location, and there was a famous scene where all the parents gather around it, and like you see it depicted where they all choose like, let's dump the bones in this truck. If that part of the movie would have felt more, would have had some extra weight to it for viewers who had seen the first two films. But for me, it's just like, I don't know, maybe they just like reference this off camera or what.
Well, in the first one, it's the big reveal is that the parents are the ones that killed Freddy, and that's why he's haunting the kids. Even though I think one of his rules is he can only haunt kids. I don't think he can haunt adults. I think that's another, or I guess he did haunt Nancy. Anyway,
she's like,
I guess you would think the parent, like you said, the parent should be the one he's haunting, but he haunts their kids. And then the second one, I think it's just a new family that moves into the neighborhood. And so they're like just figuring out Freddy for the first time. And then it's the third one, I think, that returns to the original kind of storyline where it's like, here's one of the parents that did it. And what did you think of his ghost showing up at the end? It was I was like laughing because he just kind of like floats down and he goes, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know before I passed on."
I've crossed over. And she's like, "What?" And he could have, like, he never is like, "Yeah, I was fighting Freddy and he was a skeleton and he like hurled me into it." And, like, he never explained exactly how he died or anything. So
it wasn't really him anyway. But that was another sad, because he was in the first one too, and if you ever watch New Nightmare, he's in that one too, because Nancy's, well, you'll like New Nightmare. Okay. I think you'll really enjoy that one.
That's the meta one, right? Where like it's about making a movie.
That's the one Dan Harmon watched and said, "You know what? In 20 years, I'm going to make a show that's just this."
And then Community. So the only other thing that I had written down was that I wanted to mention this thing that I read on the Wikipedia page, which is that before it was decided what script would be used for this film's story, Robert Englund wrote a script, which I guess had elements that would appear in later Friday the 13th kind of mythos, as the years went on. But his script was not chosen. There's this guy named John Saxon who wrote a script called How the Nightmare on Elm Street All Began, which would have been a prequel story, and I thought this was really interesting. Freddy would ultimately turn out to have been innocent, or at least set up for the murders by Charles Manson, who, along with his followers, would have been the main culprit of the murders, and Freddy would be forced by the mob of angry parents to make a confession of the crimes, which would enrage them further. After they lynch Freddy, he comes back to avenge his wrongful death by targeting the parents' children. And I thought, we were talking about like complicating the origins and backstory of Freddy and like the history of that character. If they had done that, where like you find out that he didn't actually do those things and was framed for it, then I thought that would have been really, really interesting. And like maybe he would be a little bit more justified in the terrorizing behavior that he's been displaying over the past several movies. But they ultimately ended up just going with, yep, he is a potential child molester and definitely child murderer. So
I think they need to take it in a direction where it's a mission to Mars and you're put into hypersleep. And somehow one of the astronauts is lived on Elm Street.
How have they not done that yet? That seems too good.
Oh God,
right?
I'm gonna have to start another Kickstarter for this.
All right. Did you have any other final thoughts on this before we wrap things up?
This is a good one, but this I have to say you have to watch at least the first one before watching 3. Unlike Friday the 13th 3D, you can't just jump in with this one. But at the same time, I think all of these movies are really interesting to watch and think about, and the dream sequences are always really cool. And if you don't like, violent deaths, I'm sure this is not something you should be watching. But if you can get past the gory details, this would probably be, there's some clunkers in there, but I think it's a good franchise to watch all the way through. So Ben, even if you don't feel like it, I would suggest checking them out just to kind of have that, because you love mythology. And that's all these movies are. It's just stupid mythology. So you might enjoy it.
All right. Yeah, I know some of them are on HBO Max right now. Not this one. I had to rent this on Amazon. Wow. But some of them are. I think maybe the 6th one might be. So maybe I'll sort of skip around there and see what happens. But oh wow, Tyler, was that the 3-goal that I just heard?
Oh yeah, sorry.
That thing.
I was so busy focusing. I was about to fall asleep, and I'm glad you woke me up because I did live in Elm Street as a child. But thank God the 3-goal woke me up.
Yes. And as usual, the 3-goal has dropped a little scroll piece of paper.
Great catch.
And I've caught it. Yeah, I'm opening it up now, and it's there's a line from a review here. This was written by John Marriott from the Radio Times of a movie that just so happens to be the 3rd entry in a franchise. And it's a mystery to me which one he's talking about, but I know that it's something we're going to talk about soon on an episode of this podcast. But the quote here from John Marriott is, "The script takes leave of reality at an early stage, and it all becomes increasingly daft and humorless with each scene." Oof. So, we got a good one to look forward to there, Tyler. It sounds like we're in for a treat with whatever movie that ends up being.
For a treat.
Oh wow! Well, we're not going to top that, folks. So let's just go ahead and put this one to bed. Tyler, I was going to say put this to bed, but then maybe the episode should never sleep because we don't want Freddy to get it.
Yeah, it's a good one. Well, either way, take your Hypnocell and visit me on Twitter at SpaceWhale2020X or the Not Just a Movies Twitter, which is at NJNM Podcast. Use the hashtag #ReturnJNM or hashtag NJNM3 and you'll find us.
Okay, yeah. And then if you want to send us an email, you can do that at notjustnewmovies@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Ben Pears and writing at slashfilm.com. And on the Slash Film Daily podcast, you can hear me sometimes over there. And I think that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. Thanks so much for listening. We will talk to you guys next time.